right, so I want to talk a little bit really quickly about the difference between ideology and mental illness. Because I hear a lot of people saying, but mental illness, white supremacy or the notion of white supremacy. Let me be clear, because white supremacy unto itself isn't a real thing, right? Like it's a white supremacist ideology, a white supremacist way of thinking. White supremacy is a lie. But a lot of people are like, white supremacy is a mental illness. It's not. It's an ideology. And an ideology is simply a structure of beliefs that help people make sense of the world around them and serve as sort of a governing foundation for how they understand their place in the world, right? A worldview. An ideology is a worldview. And we all have lots of worldviews. Christianity is a worldview. It is the worldview that Jesus was the Messiah who died on a cross and rose 3 days later for the redemption of our sins. That's a worldview. Judaism is a worldview, right? It's the view that there is a monotheistic creator, a God, and that there is a Messiah who has yet to return. These are very small snippets. I'm not a theologian in that sense of the word. But what I can say is that theology is an ideology. Ology is the study of a thing, right? And so there is a way in which, people make sense of the world through particular lenses, through particular worldviews. And then they organize their life and employ strategies to make sense with that worldview. So white supremacist ideology is simply a worldview to make sense of the world. It is the worldview that whiteness and those conferred with white skin are more valuable in the world. And that worldview was adopted as a way to amass power, to create access. Whiteness literally came about through the experience of othering. So some of this is some stuff you guys are going to have to do some research. You're going to have to spend some time looking at the inception of whiteness. And there are lots of articles and books that talk about how white people became white. One of the things that I would invite you to look at, if you just want to listen to a podcast that helps begin to think about this, the podcast is called Seeing White. Seeing White. And it's a great podcast that helps people begin to understand how whiteness came into being. But whiteness came into being under a guise of capitalism, which is also an ideology. Capitalism is an ideology. And to that end, people employ great strategies. They go to great lengths to protect their ideologies, to protect their worldviews. And so, there's a reason why we've constructed an entire tax system in the U.S. that does not fairly tax the world's largest corporations, like Amazon, like Facebook, right? It's because there's an ideology of capitalism as valuable. And so consequently, there are strategies that protect capitalism. One of those are tax breaks, right? So there are behaviors and strategies that protect the ideology of white supremacy. One of them are white supremacist terroristic murders, right? One of those are mass killings by people who are attempting to protect a worldview. That's not different than jihadist, right? Nobody ever calls jihadists mentally ill. They call them trying to protect a radical Islamist ideology. That's what they're doing, and using a strategy of murder to protect that. That's not unusual. The United States as a union was an ideology, right? The idea that the United States should be a union. And the United States went to great lengths to protect that ideology, but with the Civil War. So let's be clear that enacting violence to protect one's worldview is not mental illness. It is a strategy. It is a tool of domination. It's a tool of power. It's a tool to realign the world in the way in which you would like to see it operate. And people will often sacrifice their own lives to do that. When that happens under the guise of the nation state, again, when that happens under the guise of the U.S. military, we call it valor. We call it, honorable. But when it happens, by a random guy walking into a garlic festival, we call it crazy. And that's the point that I'm really trying to get us to get, is that protecting an ideological standpoint isn't crazy. It's a strategy. It's a tool. And it's a tool used to maintain a status quo. So the question then becomes, what's the status quo? The status quo is white supremacy, at least for these white supremacist ideology, at least for these three particular shooters. And I'm not proposing all shooters, all mass shooters, and we can argue about the definition of mass shooters, but I'm talking about specifically white men who walk into public spaces with semi-automatic weapons and try to shoot up a whole bunch of people at one time, are not always trying to protect a worldview, but certainly the last three, very professed, we're trying to protect a worldview. So that's the distinction, and I think it's important. Thanks.